By the time Eliza Harrow turned 25, she understood something most women in her position refused to admit. Respect in her world was rarely given. It was performed, maintained, protected at all costs. She had learned this not through harsh words or cruel treatment, but through quiet observation. Her family had once been respectable, modest nobility, nothing grand but stable enough to secure a future. That stability did not last. Her father, though kind, was not a strong man. Poor investments, quiet debts, and a tendency to avoid difficult decisions had slowly eroded what little security they had. They never spoke of it openly. They didn't need to. Eliza saw it in the way her mother adjusted old gowns to look new, in the way invitations became fewer each season, in the careful way servants were dismissed one by one, until the house felt far too large for the few people left within it. And so, Eliza adapted. She learned to speak carefully, to observe more than she revealed, to carry herself with a quiet dignity that suggested stability, even when none existed. Unlike other young women, she did not dream of romance. She understood marriage for what it truly was. An agreement, a transaction, a negotiation of survival. Society described her as composed, elegant, distant. Men found her respectable, though not particularly inviting. Women found her difficult to read. No one ever called her naive. And that, Eliza considered, was an advantage. The proposal arrived without warning. No prior visits. No polite introductions. No carefully orchestrated courtship. Just a letter, sealed with the unmistakable crest of one of the most powerful houses in the country. Her mother read it first, then again, and then, with a controlled breath, handed it to Eliza. She did not rush. She never did. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the paper with steady hands. The words were formal, direct, unemotional. The Duke of Vale requests your hand in marriage. Eliza read the line twice, then once more. There were details, of course, arrangements, expectations, timelines, but none of it mattered as much as the single, undeniable fact. A duke had chosen her. Not the most beautiful woman of the season. Not the wealthiest. Not the most socially powerful. Do you understand what this means? Her mother asked carefully. Eliza folded the letter. Yes. And she did. This was not a romantic interest. This was not admiration. This was a decision. A calculated one. The Duke of Vale, Sebastian Vale, was not a man people spoke of lightly. He was respected, feared, and, more importantly, avoided. Rumors followed him quietly through every gathering. Cold, unforgiving, emotionally distant. Some said his previous engagement had ended in scandal. Others claimed betrayal. No one knew the full truth, only that he did not forgive easily, and that he did not trust. Why me? Her mother asked softly, voicing the question Eliza had already considered. Eliza didn't answer immediately, because she already knew. She was safe, not politically threatening, not socially ambitious, not unpredictable. She was controlled. And a man like the Duke of Vale would choose control over passion every time. You will accept, her father said quietly from across the room. It was not a command, but it might as well have been. Eliza looked at him, at the weight behind his eyes, at the unspoken desperation he tried so hard to hide. And then she nodded. I will. The wedding was arranged quickly, efficiently, as though both parties preferred to avoid unnecessary attention, which in itself drew even more of it. The day of the ceremony arrived with a strange stillness. Eliza stood before the mirror, her reflection calm, composed, almost untouched by the significance of the moment. Her gown was exquisite. Ivory silk, structured perfectly, elegant without excess. Her hair was styled precisely, not a single strand out of place. She looked like what society expected a duchess to be. Controlled, refined, impeccable, but not soft, not vulnerable, not uncertain. The church was larger than she expected, filled, not with friends, but with observers, people curious to witness the arrangement, the choice, the mistake some might have thought. Eliza felt their eyes the moment she entered. She did not react. She never did. Instead, she walked forward with steady steps, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. And then, she saw him, Duke Sebastian Vale. He stood at the altar, exactly as she had imagined, tall, broad-shouldered. His presence quiet but undeniable. His dark hair was neatly kept, touched faintly with gray at the temples. His features were sharp, controlled, his expression completely neutral. But his eyes, His eyes were not indifferent. They were observant, calculating. When they met hers, they did not soften. They assessed, measured, and then moved away, as though she were simply another detail in a process already decided. Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Recognition. The ceremony passed without incident, without emotion, without hesitation. Vows were spoken clearly. Rings exchanged precisely. No trembling hands. No lingering glances. No illusion of romance. And just like that, she became the Duchess of Vale. The journey to his estate was silent. The carriage moved smoothly along the road, the sound of wheels against gravel the only interruption to the quiet. Eliza sat across from him, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She did not speak. She was waiting. Not for kindness. Not for comfort. But for clarity. It came sooner than expected. Without looking at her, the Duke spoke. "You will find that this house offers you considerable freedom." Eliza lifted her gaze slightly. Freedom. An unusual word to begin a marriage with. "You may manage your time as you see fit," he continued. "There will be no restrictions on your movements within the estate." She studied him carefully. "And your expectations?" she asked. His expression did not change. "I have none that require your concern." The answer was precise, but incomplete. Eliza leaned back slightly, considering. This was not control. This was distance. They arrived just before evening. The estate was exactly what one would expect of a duke. Large, imposing, impeccably maintained. But there was something else. Something quieter, emptier. As though the house was occupied, but not lived in. Servants moved efficiently around them, their movements practiced, their expressions carefully neutral. Eliza noticed everything. The way they avoided prolonged eye contact. The way the atmosphere felt restrained. Not tense. Not fearful. Just contained. Her chambers were vast. Elegant. Prepared in advance. Everything placed with intention. Nothing out of order. She stepped inside slowly, taking in the details. This was her home now. Or at least, the place she was expected to exist within. She had prepared for this moment. Not with fear, but with awareness. She understood power. Understood control. Understood the unspoken expectations that came with marriage. Especially to a man like him. So when the door opened behind her, she turned immediately. Not startled. Not hesitant. Ready. Sebastian Vale stepped inside, closing the door behind him with quiet precision. For a moment neither of them spoke. They simply observed one another. Two strangers bound by decision. Eliza broke the silence first. "I assume," she said calmly, "that we should discuss expectations clearly." There was no fear in her voice. Only control. His gaze sharpened slightly. Then, unexpectedly, he moved past her. Without acknowledgement. Without hesitation. As though she had not spoken at all. Eliza stilled. That was not what she expected. He removed his coat slowly, placing it aside with measured movements. Still not looking at her. Still not engaging. "Your rooms are yours," he said finally. "You will not be disturbed." Eliza turned fully toward him now. "And you?" she asked. Pause. Then. "My affairs are my own." The words were calm. Final. Closing. Something unfamiliar flickered beneath Eliza's composed exterior. Not anger. Not humiliation. Something sharper. Recognition. "You proposed this marriage," she said carefully. "I assumed there was a purpose." He looked at her then. Fully. Directly. And for the first time, she saw something behind the control. Not cruelty. Not indifference. But something closed. Deliberately so. "There was," he said. "And that purpose does not require your involvement beyond what has already occurred." The words landed with quiet precision. Not harsh. But unmistakably clear. Eliza held his gaze. She had prepared for control. For authority. For dominance. She had prepared to negotiate her place within his world. But this was something else entirely. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to shape her. He wasn't even trying to understand her. He was removing her. From his life. From his thoughts. From anything that mattered. "You may conduct yourself as you wish," he continued. "You will be treated with respect by the household." Pause. "As my wife, your position is secure." Position. Not presence. Not importance. Position. And then, without another word, he turned and left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Eliza stood there, still, unmoving. For the first time that day, her composure slipped, just slightly. She had entered this marriage prepared to endure, prepared to negotiate, prepared even to fight if necessary. But she had not prepared for this, for absence, for indifference, for being placed in a role, and then completely ignored within it. Slowly she exhaled. Her hands, still steady, relaxed at her sides. This was not the battle she expected. This was something far more complicated. Because control could be challenged. Authority could be negotiated. Even cruelty could be resisted. But this quiet, deliberate distance left her with nothing to push against. And for the first time since the proposal arrived, Eliza Harrow felt something dangerously close to uncertainty. She had prepared to fight for her place in this marriage. But she had not expected to be treated as though she did not matter at all. The first few days of Eliza's marriage passed with a precision that felt almost deliberate. Nothing was wrong. And yet, nothing was right either. She woke each morning in a room that was undeniably hers. The servants addressed her with perfect respect. Meals were prepared exactly to her preference, though she had never voiced those preferences aloud. Everything functioned flawlessly, too flawlessly, as though her presence had been accounted for in every detail, except the one that mattered. Duke Sebastian Vale remained present in the house, but not in her life. They shared breakfast, occasionally dinner, sometimes the same room, but never truly each other. He did not ignore her in a way that could be called rude. He acknowledged her, spoke when necessary, listened when addressed, but there was always a boundary, clear, unyielding, invisible yet impossible to cross. "You may review the estate accounts if you wish," he said one morning, his tone neutral as he set aside a document. Eliza glanced up from her tea. "I may," she repeated, "if it interests you." And that was all. No expectation. No instruction. No involvement. Freedom. Again, the word returned to her mind. But now it felt different. Less like permission. More like dismissal. Eliza was not a woman who required constant attention. She had never been. She valued independence, clarity, control. But this was not independence. This was absence. By the end of the first week, she began to notice the patterns. And Eliza Harrow had always been very good at observing patterns. Sebastian kept strict routines. He rose early, worked long hours, attended to estate matters personally, rarely delegating beyond necessity. But there were gaps, moments when his behavior shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Certain corridors he avoided entirely, rooms he never entered, doors that remained closed, not locked, but untouched. At night, he often remained awake long after the rest of the house had settled. Eliza noticed the faint glow of light beneath his study door as she passed through the corridor. Once, twice, every night. He was not avoiding responsibility. He was avoiding something else. And for the first time, Eliza felt something beyond calculated understanding. Curiosity. It unsettled her. Because curiosity implied interest, and interest implied involvement. And she had not yet decided if that was wise. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in the sitting room, Eliza encountered her first real interruption. "You've reorganized the ledgers." The voice was calm, but not indifferent. She looked up. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the neatly arranged stack of papers before her. "I found the previous system inefficient," she replied evenly. Pause. Then, "You corrected 3 discrepancies." It wasn't a question. Eliza inclined her head slightly. They were minor. They were overlooked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, he stepped into the room. It was a small movement, but it changed something. "You have experience in this?" he asked. Enough to recognize inconsistency. Another pause. His gaze lingered on her longer this time. Not dismissive. Not distant. Assessing. "Continue," he said finally. And then, he left. Eliza remained where she was. Still, thoughtful. That had been the first time. He had engaged with her directly. Not as a formality. Not as an obligation. But with attention. It was brief. Subtle. But undeniable. And it shifted something. Not in him. In her. Because now, she knew he was capable of seeing her. He simply chose not to. That realization was irritating. Days turned into weeks. Eliza adapted. Not by seeking his attention, but by withdrawing her expectation of it. She stopped waiting for conversation, stopped analyzing his absence at meals, stopped considering what he thought of her. Instead, she occupied her time fully. She reviewed estate operations, spoke with staff, walked the grounds, read extensively. She became present within the house, without trying to belong to him. And slowly, without realizing it, that changed everything. Because Sebastian noticed. Not immediately, but gradually. At first it was small things. She no longer waited for him before beginning meals. No longer paused when he entered a room. No longer adjusted her behavior to accommodate his presence. She acknowledged him, but she did not orbit him. And that was new. One evening he found her in the library. She was seated near the window, a book open in her hands, her posture relaxed in a way he had not seen before. She did not rise when he entered, did not close the book, did not speak. She simply glanced at him briefly, then returned to reading. Sebastian remained standing for a moment, observing. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Then, without a word, he turned and left. Eliza did not look up. The shift continued, quiet, unspoken, but unmistakable, until, inevitably, it reached a breaking point. It happened during dinner. The room was silent as usual. The sound of cutlery against porcelain the only interruption. Eliza set her glass down carefully. Then, without hesitation, she spoke. "Why did you marry me?" The question landed between them. Clear, direct, impossible to ignore. Sebastian did not respond immediately. He placed his knife down with deliberate precision, then looked at her, fully. "You already know the answer," he said. "Do I?" she replied calmly. Pause. "You were a suitable choice." The words were exactly what she expected. And yet, hearing them spoken aloud, was different. "Suitable," she repeated. His expression did not change. "You required stability," he continued. "I required discretion." There it was. The truth. Simple. Plain. Transactional. Eliza leaned back slightly in her chair. "And nothing beyond that?" she asked. A brief flicker crossed his gaze. Gone almost instantly. No. The answer was immediate. Certain. And entirely incomplete. Eliza studied him. Carefully. "You speak as though this arrangement is entirely practical," she said. "It is. And yet," she continued, "you avoid half your own house." Silence. For the first time. He did not respond immediately. The air shifted. Subtly. But undeniably. "You observe too much," he said quietly. "I observe what is presented," she replied. Their eyes held. This time, neither looked away. "You asked a question," he said after a moment. "I answered it. Not completely." Something in his expression hardened. Complete answers are not required. Eliza's lips curved faintly. Not a smile. Something sharper. "No," she said softly. "They are not." She rose from her seat. Smooth. Controlled. And without another word, she left the room. Sebastian remained where he was. Still, unmoving. For a long moment. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Something had changed. Not in the structure of the marriage, but in the balance, because for the first time, Eliza Harrow had not accepted the space he placed between them. She had stepped away from it, on her own terms. After that night, she did not ask again. She did not push, did not question, did not seek explanation. Instead, she lived exactly as he had permitted her to, freely, completely. And that was what unsettled him, because freedom was never meant to create distance. It was meant to prevent conflict. But now, it was doing something else entirely. It was removing him from her world. And for the first time, Sebastian Vale found himself aware of something he had not anticipated. Not irritation, not control, but attention, unwanted, uninvited, and growing. One evening as she crossed the corridor he paused, watching her. She did not notice, or perhaps, she did, and chose not to react. For the first time since their marriage, Sebastian Vale was no longer avoiding his wife. He was watching her, carefully, and without fully understanding why. He was beginning to wonder what he had deliberately kept out of reach. The first invitation arrived in the middle of a quiet afternoon. It was delivered with the same precision as everything else in the house, placed neatly on the silver tray, presented without comment. Eliza noticed the seal before she even reached for it, a crest she recognized, not because it mattered, but because it represented something inevitable. Society. She broke the seal carefully, unfolding the thick paper with steady hands. A formal gathering. Attendance expected. Not optional. For a brief moment she considered ignoring it. Not out of fear, but indifference. Then, she set the letter down. Because indifference, she realized, was not freedom. It was avoidance. And she had not spent weeks reclaiming her independence, only to retreat from it now. Sebastian found her later that evening. The letter lay untouched beside her. "You received an invitation," he said. "I did." Pause. "You are not required to attend." Eliza looked up at him. There it was again. Freedom. Offered easily. Given without consequence. She studied him for a moment. Then, "I know," she said. Another pause. "I will go." It was a simple decision. But it shifted something. Because this time, she wasn't choosing based on expectation. She was choosing for herself. The evening of the gathering arrived with quiet certainty. Eliza stood before the mirror, adjusting the final detail of her gown. Deep emerald silk. Structured. Elegant. Unmistakably deliberate. She looked composed. Confident. Not because she felt entirely certain, but because she no longer needed to hide behind uncertainty. When she entered the grand hall, the reaction was immediate. Eyes turned. Conversations slowed. Then resumed. Quieter. Sharper. Eliza moved through the room with controlled ease. She recognized the looks. Curiosity. Speculation. Judgment. "She carries herself well," someone murmured. "For now." Another voice softer. "But how long will that last?" Eliza did not react. She had heard worse. And unlike before, the words did not settle. They passed. Like noise. Sebastian arrived moments later. The shift in the room was immediate. Conversation stilled. Attention sharpened. He moved through the crowd with effortless authority. Until he reached her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, without hesitation, he offered his arm. Not out of obligation, but choice. Eliza looked at him. Just briefly. Then, she accepted. The evening unfolded as expected. Polite conversations. Carefully veiled insults. Measured interactions. But something was different. Subtle. Sebastian did not leave her side. He did not speak excessively. But when addressed, he included her. Deliberately. Consistently. And when someone attempted to overlook her, he redirected them. Effortlessly. It was not dramatic. But it was unmistakable. By the time they returned home, the silence between them felt altered. Not distant. Not comfortable. Something in between. "You handled yourself well," he said as they stepped inside. Eliza removed her gloves slowly. "I've had practice." A faint pause. "Yes," he said. There was something in his tone this time. Something less controlled. Days passed. The invitations continued. But so did the tension. Because something had changed. And neither of them had acknowledged it. It was not the gatherings. Not the whispers. Not even the shift in their interactions. It was the question. Still unanswered. Eliza found the answer by accident. Or perhaps, inevitably, the door had always been there. At the far end of the corridor. Unremarkable. Unvisited. She had noticed it before. Of course she had. But she had respected the boundary. Until now. The house was quiet. The kind of silence that made small decisions feel larger than they were. Eliza stood before the door. Still, thinking. Then, she opened it. The room inside was untouched. Not abandoned. Preserved. Furniture arranged with care. Curtains drawn halfway. Thus minimal. As though it was maintained. But never used. Her gaze moved slowly across the space. Until it stopped. On the portrait. A woman. Beautiful. Refined. But there was something in her expression. Something distant. Familiar. "I asked that room remain closed." The voice came from behind her. Come. But not controlled. Eliza turned. Sebastian stood in the doorway. And for the first time, there was no distance in his expression. Only something raw. Unfiltered. "I wondered how long it would take," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Didn't move. "She looks like someone who learned to be quiet," Eliza continued. The words landed carefully. Not as accusation. As observation. His jaw tightened. "You've seen enough." "No," she said. Her voice steady. "I haven't." Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. "You married her for the same reason," Eliza said. It wasn't a question. She was suitable. Something broke. Not loudly. Not violently. But undeniably. You think you understand? He said. His voice lower now. Tighter. I think you repeated the same mistake, she replied. The words hung between them. Sharp. Dangerous. For a moment, it seemed as though he might leave. Withdraw. Rebuild the distance. But he didn't. She was obedient, he said finally. The words slow. Measured. Careful. Agreeable. Pause. And completely alone. Eliza didn't move. Didn't speak. I believed silence meant peace, he continued. I believed control meant stability. His gaze shifted. To the portrait. She never argued. Never demanded. Never needed. A long pause. And I never noticed, until it was too late. The weight of those words settled into the room. Eliza stepped forward slowly. Not cautiously. Not hesitantly. Deliberately. You didn't protect yourself, she said quietly. You removed yourself. His gaze snapped back to hers. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. It's worse. Silence. You built distance to avoid pain, she continued, and then lived inside it. Her voice didn't rise, didn't accuse. It simply stated the truth. And now, she said softly, you've done it again. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not rejection. Recognition. I did not ask you to fix me, he said. I'm not trying to, she replied. Pause. I'm deciding whether to stay. The words were quiet, but they changed everything. Because for the first time, this was not about his choice. It was about hers. The days that followed were different. Not suddenly better. Not resolved. But real. The distance between them no longer felt deliberate. It felt uncertain. Because now, it could be crossed. Or not. The final gathering of the season arrived with expectation. And this time, there was no question. They would attend together. The ballroom was brighter than before. Louder. More watchful. Eliza entered with steady confidence. Not because she had nothing to lose, but because she finally understood what she refused to lose. Sebastian walked beside her. Not distant. Not detached. Present. The room reacted. Of course it did. But this time, Eliza didn't measure herself against it. She simply existed within it. Later that evening, at the height of attention, Sebastian turned to her. Not subtly. Not privately. Publicly. And offered his hand. Pause. Then, Eliza took it. Not out of expectation, but choice. The music began. And for the first time, they moved together. Not perfectly. Not effortlessly. But intentionally. I was wrong, he said quietly. Eliza didn't look surprised. I know. A brief pause. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Her grip on his hand tightened slightly. You don't have to know, she said. Another step. You just have to choose it. When the dance ended, the room was silent. Watching. Because something had changed. Not in spectacle, but in certainty. Later that night, back at the estate, the silence returned. But this time, it was not empty. Eliza stood by the window. Sebastian behind her. Not distant. Not close. Something in between. I won't stay where I don't matter, she said quietly. Pause. You do. The answer came without hesitation. She turned. And if that changes? His expression didn't harden. Didn't close. It won't. Not a promise. A decision. For the first time, Eliza believed him. Not because of his words, but because of his choice. She stepped closer. Not carefully. Not cautiously. Willingly. And when their hands met, it was not uncertain. It was not hesitant. It was steady. Eliza Harrow had entered the marriage prepared to endure, prepared to adapt, prepared to survive. But she had not expected this. To be given the choice. To stay. And for the first time in her life, she did not choose out of obligation. She chose. Because she wanted to. Sebastian Vale had built his life on distance. On control. On silence. But now, for the first time, he allowed something else. Not certainty. Not perfection. But presence. And that changed everything.